All right, hey, I'm Jon Gordon. I'm here with Ryan Holiday, one of my favorite writers. Ryan, let's start with the important question.
Okay.
You live on a farm. What made you want to live on a farm, and what's that all about?
When my first book came out and hit the New York Times bestseller list, I thought I should be in New York. That's where writers live. That's where you have to go, right? That's where publishing. And I moved to New York, and I was working on the obstacles way while I was living there, and I hated it. I just hated it. I hated how expensive it was. I hated how noisy it was. Weirdly, I hated how much was going on, right? I felt like I could never say no to anything because everything felt like the kind of thing that you had to say yes to. And so it was really hard to write, and it was really hard just to sort of enjoy life. And so we ended up moving to Texas. This is my office here. We lived in town first, and then we ended up sort of heading out into the country a ways. And it's a farm in the literal sense. I mean, like, we don't grow anything. We have, cows and goats and chickens and stuff like that, but it's not like when people think ranch in Texas, they think something much more significant than what I've got. But it is, a way for me to sort of step away from work in an important sort of balanced way. It's a way for me to sort of connect with nature, I think, in an important way. And it's also just, I feel like it's a chance. It was a chance to do something different, right? I think it's going to be cool to raise our son out there. It's just like I live on a dirt road, right? It's like going back in time a bit, and I think a positive way. I still have access to all the things I like about sort of modern city life, but I've got something a little bit more. Authentic's the wrong word, but a little bit more laid back, and it's been really good for me.
That's awesome. Do you milk the cows?
No, we just raise the cows for meat. We don't milk the goats. The only thing we you take the eggs from the chickens, obviously, but one of the things that we did have to talk about is like, okay, all the decisions we make, we want to make sure that they're not adding to the stress of life. And like, I enjoy fixing the fences or, walking the property or, the occasional sort of project, but I didn't want it to be this thing that, prevented us from traveling or, I want it to be work, but in a positive way, not work in a way that adds stress to family and personal life.
Has it helped you with your creativity?
I think so. Like when I'm really stressed, like I just sort of walk out and you see these animals and they're not experiencing any of that, right? Like I say in one of my talks, like their job is just to not die. That's like their only job. And then you remember that that's actually your job as a human too. Like you're one, we can feel like the world sort of rises and falls on what we're doing, that we have to be the absolute best at it. A lot of the things that make us really good at our jobs are really unhealthy traits in our personal lives. And so sometimes seeing this other side of life, I mean, even my neighbors, like, my neighbors don't do any of the things that I do. And so it's a nice reset for me and a sort of a reminder that, there's no like race that we're really running here. And that the reward for success should be that you have the life that you want, not, regret that you don't have the life that you want.
Yeah, the cow is not thinking about what is my purpose. I don't know my purpose.
Right. It's not even really comparing itself to the other cows, right? It's not, it's not worried about whether it's being a good cow or bad. They just are, right? And that's that expression, right? It's human being, not human doing. But we are a product of that work that we do. And so we can often get our identity tied up in that.
When I think of writer, I think of someone who really looks at writing as a craft. I see as a writer. I mean, you are a real writer. You think about it all the time. You live it, you breathe it. When did this start for you to be becoming a writer? And when did you know that you wanted to be a writer?
I don't know. I wasn't one of those people that like wanted to be a writer my whole life. Sort of like you. You had a career first, and then the writing thing was this sort of passion that you got lucky enough to get to turn into a job. I do remember in maybe 11th grade, I wrote this essay, and my English teacher wrote something about it. She said, like, you will be a literary figure, like I promise you, or I guarantee. And it was like the first time that I don't know what it says that it took someone else to recognize it, but it's someone else sort of recognized this talent in me and said that it was something I should pursue. And I think that just sort of, I didn't do it right away, but I think that sort of stayed in the back of my mind. And as I worked up confidence and worked up sort of a perspective and a philosophy of life, the idea of being able to write it seemed at least possible to me.
When did you start writing to begin with?
I remember I started my first blog in maybe 2006, probably for like 11 people or something. And I wrote almost every day for, my first book came out so if I started my blog in 2006, my first book came out in the summer of 2012. So I basically wrote for free on an almost daily basis for 6 years before it was in any way a viable career. And I kept my day job until my third book. So until right before the launch of my fourth book. So it wasn't like, burn the boats behind me, I'm going to become a writer kind of thing. It was more of a gradual transition.
What was your day job at the time?
Yeah, I had a career in marketing. I started in Hollywood working for musicians and actors at a talent agency. And then I ended up as the director of marketing for a company called American Apparel, which was at one point one of the hottest fashion brands in the world.
Did that prepare you for writing that kind of work?
Well, I do think having, advertising is probably the toughest of all mediums, right? Like, you have the least amount of time. It's the least forgiving of the formats. You have the least amount of space, and people don't want to see what you're doing, right? Like, by definition, since you have to pay for advertising, it's because the customer doesn't want it, right? So to do it well, you really have to figure out like what catches people's attention, what's compelling, what's provocative, how to say what you're saying as in the fewest words possible. So I do think, it helped sharpen my skills. I think copywriting is really important because even as an author, right, you write your book, but then you have to write on the back of the book what the hell this book is. And if you can't describe this thing, and I find it an alarming amount of times, authors will spend 2, 3, 4 years on a book. And then you go, what's your book about? And they can't tell you, they can't sell it to you. And so I think I definitely benefited from those copywriting skills. The ability to effectively communicate what's in your mind and why people should care. I think it's the most important skill.
What was your first book, real briefly?
So my first book, it seems weird now to say this, but I wrote a book in 2012 that was an expose of media manipulation and fake news. So it was, we could say it was slightly ahead of its time. I was probably too early on it, but it sort of became this sort of, cult classic in advertising and marketing and journalism. It was really provocative at the time when it came out. But I remember when that book came out, that I'm always a big fan of sort of not doing the next expected thing, right? So the next expected thing would have been to write a book on persuasion or to write a book on another book about marketing. Like, you've seen this, they sort of want to make you a guru about a very specific thing, right? That's where the speaking income is or the consulting income. And so when I went to my publisher and I was like, for my next book, I'd really like to do ancient philosophy. They were not like, well, sign us up. That sounds fantastic.
Well, the first book I read of yours was Obstacle is the Way. Was that the next book?
That was the next book. I did like a little sort of shorter ebook in between, which isn't super important. But I was like, look, I want to do this book on Stoic philosophy. I think it will do really well. And they were basically like, what's the least amount of money we can give you and not hurt your feelings? Like that was sort of that was the discussion.
And it became a huge mega hit. Why did you write that book, and why did it appeal to you in the first place?
I mean, it was the book that I said that my first book was the book I had to write. Like it was It was the book that was urgent. I felt like it was of the moment. I felt like it was this weight that I wanted to get off my chest. Like I really understood how this sort of underbelly of marketing worked. And I wanted to show people, mainly for a lot of the, negative reasons we're seeing now. But Stoicism was like how I lived my life. It was the toolkit that I'd used to manage stress in my career, in my personal life. It was how I sort of found purpose and meaning. And I was just fascinated with it. And so that was the book I wanted to write. And, like in Hollywood where it's the one for you, one for me kind of thing, my thinking was, look, I'll write this book that I know will do well. That was the marketing book. And then I'm going to do this one because it's what's important to me. And yeah, it ended up being this surprise hit in sports of all places. When I was thinking, look, ancient philosophy, strategy, I think this will make sense in a business context. I wasn't thinking the New England Patriots or the San Antonio Spurs or something, but that's ended up sort of how it's gone, which has been a real treat.
Yeah, that's how I heard about you. Various coaches started to tell me about the obstacle is the way. You got to check this out. I've spoken to the Pirates for the past 5 years. I know you spoke to them just recently. How did you like that? How did you like that? How did you enjoy that?
Well, it's funny, like I talk to a lot of businesses. I talk to a lot of universities, and it's always funny to go into this room of sort of like grizzled coaches that are very much, X's and O's. They've played this game a long time. They know baseball or football or basketball inside and out. And then you walk in and you're like, hey, look, I'd like to talk about ancient philosophy. You would think that you'd think that a university would be much more receptive to that message than these coaches. But you find that they have this intense hunger for any kind of perspective that will make them both better as leaders or better as coaches, right? And so I've tended to find that I have the most stimulating conversations and I have the most impact on these people because, for the most part, like obviously there's strength and conditioning programs and they practice for a reason at, let's say, the Pirates, but like the players were chosen because they're really good at baseball, right? Like they've got the arm or they've got the reflexes or whatever it is. What the coaches are there to do is sort of put all that together and get the most out of this guy that they're paying $100 million to. And I think that's where stuff like that's in your books or, hopefully a little bit of what's in my books is that, like, where's the mental edge? That's what these guys are really looking for. They're like, we got all the other stuff handled. Give me something that I can use to bounce back from an injury or to reach a guy that's, stuck in his own head or we had we went all the way last year and we lost in the last game. How do we come back from that? That's not a problem you solve in the gym.
Exactly. And say you met a guy in the gym.
Yeah.
He's a pro athlete and he asked you about obstacle is the way. How would you define that book to him? How would you summarize that book for that person?
I think the essential premise of that book is this Stoic idea that we don't control what happens around us, but we always control how we respond. And so the Stoics were very much about, sort of managing our perceptions. How do we see the world? Do we see it objectively? Do we see it clearly? Do we see it optimistically? How we see what we face largely determines how we're going to do with that thing. Then, of course, what action are you going to take, right? This isn't the secret. Magically wishing something is good. That's not going to make a difference. How do you act unselfishly, and how do you act without ego? How do you act courageously? How do you act with perseverance? And then the final sort of discipline of that idea is, well, what do you do with the things that are really outside your control? What if it actually is a season-ending injury or a career-ending injury? Or what if the refs really are terribly unfair to your team or something, right? What if the commissioner suspends you and it's not your fault? Well, then there's nothing you can't actually change that situation, but you can use it as an opportunity to do something else. And so to me, that's the simplicity of Stoicism. Of course, in practice, it's extraordinarily difficult, as I, learn every day in my own life, but that's the idea.
Love that. Where did the phrase "the obstacle is the way" come from?
It actually comes from indirectly from Marcus Aurelius. So you have the Emperor of Rome, the most powerful man in the world. He's literally worshipped as a god in his own life. And he writes in his journal, because his journal survives to us in this book. We call it the Meditations. But he says, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. And this is the Stoic idea that there really is no such thing as an obstacle. There's only an opportunity to do something. It might not be what you want to do. It might not be as good as what you were planning to do, but it's still an opportunity to do something. You know, somebody spits in your face, right? That's an unpleasant thing. You wouldn't have chosen that. But is that an opportunity to practice, self-control or forgiveness? Or, is it a chance for you to stand up for yourself, right? Any number of those options is available to you, and you've got to choose what that is.
I love that. So then you wrote, ego is the enemy. Tell us about the ego. Why is it the enemy?
Well, it's funny. One of the teams that really loved Obstacles the Way was the New England Patriots, and I was at Mike Lombardi's house. He was a special assistant to Bill Belichick, the former manager of the Cleveland Browns. And we were talking about it, and I was saying, I was thinking about writing this book about humility. And he was like, man, ego. He's like, ego is the cancer of my profession. That's what he said. And I was thinking about it after I left, and I was like, is there really a profession that ego is not a cancer, right? Like, is there any field where like ego is really important? Like, we need more ego. Like, no coach has ever been like, we need more ego in this locker room. And just like no doctor, no surgeon has ever said that about an operating room, right? Like, ego is always this sort of toxic force. And when sometimes I think people mistakenly confuse confidence and ego. But ego to me is this enemy. It's the enemy of creativity. It's the enemy of teamwork. It's the enemy of insight. It's the enemy of patience, right? All the traits that are really important, whether it's sports, business, writing, art. Ego's this thing that gets in the way. It makes a hard thing harder.
What did you learn from writing that book?
Man, it was much harder to Obstacles the Way is like this raw, like go do it. And, ego, I think, required me to be much more vulnerable. It required me to look at my own ego. It's hard to write a book about ego, right? Because are you saying that you've mastered your ego and you don't have one? It was an uncomfortable look in the mirror, right? Like, it's funny. I think we're really good at spotting other people's egos and really quick to criticize them. But it's harder to sort of step back and go like, here's where mine is causing me problems in my own life. And so it stretched me both, I think, creatively and personally.
Yeah. Have you noticed that you notice the ego more since writing that book?
Yeah, of course. I mean, look, the ultimate benefit, aside from the sales and the cool opportunities of obstacle and ego, is like, I wrote a book about overcoming obstacles, so I really can't complain about anything ever. And then I wrote this book about ego, so I really can't be a jerk ever, or people will call me out. Like, the books are sort of this ultimate accountability. And then I have both phrases. I don't know if you can see.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. I have both phrases tattooed on both of my forearms. And because I, even having spent many years with the ideas, I would not say that they come naturally, right? It's this sort of constant process. A martial artist I talked to, he said, like, it's sort of like sweeping the floor, right? Just because you sweep it once doesn't mean that it's clean. The dirt always comes back. And I think ego is a little bit like that, right? Like, you can get totally to a place of no ego, and then you get a couple successes under your belt, and then it's right there. And so it's this constant, you're pushing it back always. You're sweeping it away.
I love it. I mean, just the other day, I was having more success than ever. And I found myself actually being more miserable than ever.
Sure.
Because I was achieving the success, and I was looking to the next thing, the bigger and better thing. And I found myself really losing my heart. And I saw that. What would you advise me in that moment when the ego was getting the best of me?
Yeah. I mean, a sports thing, I was lucky enough to talk to the Crimson Tide, Nick Saban, a few years ago. And we talked about this idea of an inner scorecard versus an outer scorecard. And I think if it's always important. Like, I think it's important that we have goals that are mostly about beating ourselves rather than measuring ourselves against other people. So if like for instance, I remind myself that like my dream was to write a book, period. Right? My dream wasn't to sell the most copies of anyone ever. So it's like, I've got to realize, like, I not only wrote one book, I've written 7 books. So it's all gravy from here. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm living the dream, right? I can't, like, I have to, my new goal is now to be the best writer that I can possibly be. And that's always in my control. Like, the amount of effort that I put in every day is going to make me better at being, make me a better writer. If I'm measuring myself against the New York Times bestseller list, or I'm measuring myself against who got a better review in, this newspaper or that newspaper, you're always going to be miserable. You know, Marcus Aurelius, he has this line, he's saying, sanity and happiness is tying your success to what you say and do, not what other people say and think. And like, it's also just, it's constantly going to mess with you. Like, I had a book come out last week. It's probably sold the fewest copies of any of my books so far, like in terms of measuring week over week, but it's got the most prestigious reviews. And so it's like, it was just a good reminder to me that it's like, you never get all of it, right? Like, you never get, you think you, like, when my books were selling super well, I'm like, why aren't I getting these reviews? Right. And then I get the reviews, and then the sales aren't there. And then it's like, what? You just can't care about any of it. You got to care about, is it the best thing you were capable of doing? And then everything else, you take it when you get it, and you let it go if you don't get it.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that book, but I have to tell you, I was at TCU baseball last year, and they had ego is the enemy on the wall of their facility. They were basically building their team that year based on you and your theme and your book. What does that feel like, knowing that that's the case?
Well, I'm wearing this Iowa sweatshirt that they've got it on the wall of their gym too. It's crazy, man. Like, I try not to think about it because it's so surreal. Like, the idea that, like, I made up this phrase, right? Ego is the enemy. And now it's like in the wall of these sort of dominant, whether it's baseball or football, these dominant institutions in their division or, in their sport. It's really cool. But I feel like you don't dwell on it. You just get back to work. And one of the great things about writing, and I'm sure sports are the same way, it's that the thing is so hard that, like, if you spend 1 ounce of your energy sort of like looking backwards or patting yourselves on the back, that that's energy not spent like maintaining the level that you have to maintain to be in the league, like you and I are there's not a professional league, but we're professional writers, and how many people would kill to sort of knock you out and replace you, right? Like, a lot. And so I just think, like, if I'm walking around sort of having this thing in my head buzz around about how awesome I am, that's making me not work as hard and not do what I need to do.
Yeah, and so then after ego is the enemy, you didn't let the ego get to you.
Yeah.
You then the success of that didn't hurt your ego. And then you wrote Perennial Seller, which is really about how a book becomes a huge hit, or how really anything becomes a huge hit. Share some of those insights with us.
Yeah. I think a lot of people want to make things that last, but then they want to rush through the process, right? We always want that lucky break. We want to get it early. We don't want to sort of take the time and do it right and build sort of a foundation. And so I think with my own books, for instance, I'm very deliberate about what I'm writing about, who I'm writing about, how I'm taking the time to do that, even how my marketing is set up for the long term. I think we tend to get way too focused with what's happening around us right this instant and measuring ourselves against that, rather than measuring ourselves against the things that matter over the long term. So to me, that book was just sort of a meditation on legacy and on building. I'm saying, like, if you're a creative team, if you're a creator, you want to be like the San Antonio Spurs. You don't want to be like the team that wins a championship one time or makes it to the Super Bowl one time, and then you never hear from again. Like, you want to build a system that builds replicable greatness, that you plug pieces in and out of. And that's what I'm trying to do in my own career. And the authors that I work with, I try to help them do that as well.
Can you manufacture a hit, though? Can you make something a perennial seller, or is part of it just magic?
I mean, I think there's an element of magic to it. One of the analogies I use in the book comes from Bill Walsh. You know, Bill Walsh was saying that the job of the coach is to build a permanent base camp near the summit, right? So that weather permitting, you can make the ascent. And I think his point was, if you have a great, like, and football is like this, where it's like, if you have a great team and you make the playoffs, anyone has a shot, right? Like, if you don't make the playoffs, you can't make it to the Super Bowl. But it's not like baseball where it's like, you have to win a lot of games, you know, to make it all the way to the World Series, right? And it's really hard to beat, you know, in a 5 or 7 game series, it's really hard to beat a good team. But in a one-to-one, in a one-off game, it's anybody, you know, it's anybody. And so I think what he was saying is like, look, if you build a system for greatness, if you make great stuff year in and year out, at some point you're going to get lucky, you know, like injuries, weather, the right team, the right time, the right energy, the right young players, you're going to go there. And so that's sort of what I think. So it's like, I want to put myself in a position to be lucky to go all the way.
So I'm a young writer, or I'm a young athlete, or I'm a young artist, or a young businessman. Give me one piece of advice to be a perennial seller.
I'll give you two. How's that? There's a line from Jeff Bezos. He's the founder of Amazon. He says, you know, you got to focus on the things that don't change, right? I think too many people are obsessed with what's hot right now, and they don't ask themselves, is this thing still, like your books, I think they go to motivation or craftsmanship or positivity. These are perennial trends. So if you write a great book on them, it's not as if like tomorrow craftsmanship is not going to be important, right? Or 10 years from now, we're going to be like, craftsmanship doesn't matter, right? You've put yourself in a position to be perennial. I think that's number one. I think number two is like, you actually have to do the work. You know, my friend Austin Kleon, he's this great writer. He lives in Austin, and he has this line. He says, you can't be the noun without doing the verb. You know, people want to be writers. They don't want to write. Or people want to be in the NBA, but they don't want to practice, right? Mm-hmm. They don't want to live the life. You know, they want to have the benefits, but they don't want to do the work. And so, look, I think it's really, really, really hard. How many people would love, they see a coach win a championship game and they go, I could do that, but could they work 14-hour days? You know, could they leave that championship game and go on a recruiting trip like the next morning? Probably not, you know? And so it's, can you do the work, I think, is the real variable.
How old are you now?
I've turned 31 this year.
So 31 years old, but you've been doing this for over 10 years, right?
Yeah. I'm right about I'm right about the first round of putting in all my hours. You know, if Malcolm Gladwell said it was 10,000, Robert Greene, who I love, you know, said it's 20,000. I think maybe I did the first leg of the marathon is where I feel like I am.
I love that.
Yeah.
All right. So you wrote Perennial Seller, and then the next book was something that was a huge shock to me to see, that you wrote a book called Conspiracy. Tell us about that, and why would you, after writing all the books you wrote, move into this category and write this kind of book?
I mean, my belief is if you're not pushing yourself, you're letting your craft down. Like if you're not pushing forward, I mean, like, why did you write the Power of Positive Leadership? You could have written another book of stories, right? Or picked another story, but you wanted to be more explicit. You wanted to step out onto the stage a little bit. And that was probably a huge challenge. It was very intimidating. And for me, this book it stretched me creatively. It stretched me personally. You know, it's this almost Shakespearean story about the billionaire Peter Thiel spending 10 years, you know, $20 million trying to bring this rogue gossip outlet that had cruelly outed him as gay. He was trying to sort of bring them to justice. Somehow it ends up involving Hulk Hogan and the FBI and the President of the United States. in this landmark court case that where they win $140 million judgment. So it's this incredible, unreal story. But I was fascinated by that. I was fascinated by the fact that Peter Thiel was willing to talk to me. But it was, to me, also this opportunity to tell a much larger story. Like, what does it mean to set out to do this impossible thing? And do most of us have the patience and the organization and the coordination and the discipline to pull off what he pulled off? And so I tried to make it sort of a master class in strategy and secrecy. That's it. I tried to make it a bigger book, and I don't know if I got there, but I know it's my best book, and so I'm proud of that.
He held this grudge for a long period of time, right? Eventually, his goal was to get even, and he did. He brought down Gawker, right?
I mean, I think it was more than a grudge. It was like they did this thing to him, and then he realized that they were doing it to other people. So it was like, I think he saw it more as this heroic quest. But yeah, what's so impressive is Gawker outs him in 2007, and he doesn't, and he simply steps back and thinks and plans for 5 years before he even takes the first step. And then, so that's 2012. It's not until 2016 that he actually gets his verdict. So for 9 years, he worked on this project in secret. He had this master plan. And at the very least, I'm just impressed that, this guy has unlimited resources. He's surrounded by yes men and yes women. That's the nature of power and wealth. And here he has such inner strength and inner control. He manages to keep his eye on this prize, and he wins. Whether you agree with what he did or not, it's almost unbelievable.
Yeah. So why should people read this book?
To me, it's a meditation on the use and abuse of power, right? What does power mean? How do you use it? How do you wield it? How do you shape the world in the image that you want it to be in, right? Like he believed that cruelly outing someone, violating their privacy, as Gawker was wont to do, was improper. He believed that it shouldn't happen in a civilized world. And he tried to talk to people about it, and nobody listened. And so he said, well, then I'm going to fix this. And he said, I'm not going to wait to get everyone on board with this. I'm just going to do it. And so to me, it's inspiring, right? It's dark, sure, and there's an element of revenge. But to me, it's kind of like the Count of Monte Cristo, right? It's like we're rooting for the guy who had something happen to him, and then he was so committed to doing what he's doing and so brilliant at it that you can't help but learn some lessons.
I get approached a lot to write a variety of different books, but I know what's for me. How did you know that this was a story that you were meant to tell?
That's the ultimate question, right? I don't think but you know it in your gut, right? I think this is where gut comes in a big way. To me, it was a story I couldn't get out of my head. I wanted to know what happened, right? And I felt like that was a good sign. Like if I wasn't interested, like if it didn't get me out of bed, the fact that, there was potentially a big advance, or that it was going to be newsworthy, or all these things, those would be bad reasons to do it. So I think ideally as an artist, or, if you're in sports or you're a leader, whatever, it's like, if you're not intrinsically motivated to do this thing, like if it's not calling to you, you should question it.
Love that. And as we move towards the end of the interview, I like to have these too long, but God, it's so intriguing to pick your brain and learn from you, and just to see how you work.
Thanks.
One question before we move to the end. So this book, when it becomes a movie, which it will.
Okay.
But even before that, will you write the screenplay, or will you work on it?
I'd like to be involved. But that goes to the original point of, I always want to try to stretch myself and learn. I don't want to bite off more than I can chew, right? So I don't want to think that I can do this thing that I have no training in, but I do want to learn. Like I'd love to emerge from the process having a new insight for the craft.
Love it. All right. So who's your hero? I like to do a Triple H, hero, hardship, highlight. So who's your hero?
Let's go with Marcus Aurelius. I love this idea that, again, you're the most powerful man in the world, but he's also a philosopher. You know, it's like we have this saying, absolute power corrupts absolutely. He's like the one exception to that rule.
Love that. What's a highlight in your life that you just can't, you wouldn't be who you are if it didn't happen?
So I got a 15-month-old right now. We were talking about this earlier. It's just this new side of me that I didn't quite know was there before. And it's like, it's my favorite part of the day is going home, where it used to be my favorite part was working, you know? And so it's been a good balance because I still love both things a great deal. And I don't want to betray either one of them.
I follow you on Instagram, so I see that you take him out for runs in a stroller.
Yeah.
Are you tracking all the miles that you're running?
Yeah. I mean, I have an Apple Watch, so like, he doesn't sleep. He just like hates sleeping. That's like his thing. So I usually take him for about 2 hours in the morning, and we go for a long walk or we go for a run while his mom catches up on sleep. And so that's sort of like our time together. And it's a really good sort of way to ease into the day for me. It's become, I'm big on routine. And so like having a kid blew up my old routine, but it's given me new routines that I really like.
What's it like when you're on the road? Is it tough to be away from him?
Yeah, it is, but it's made me more disciplined, right? Because I want to get in and get out faster. It makes me consider opportunity. It's like it's weird. It's like you'd think because we're selfish that if it was something I didn't want to do, I would just say no. But we never do that, right? Because money gets in the way. And now it's like, oh, wait, it doesn't matter what I want. It's like I'm taking this time from someone else, you know? And I've kind of I've promised him time, you know? And so if I, go to Toledo to do something that's not that important, that's not being a good parent.
So hardship, what's a defining moment that happened in your life that made you who you are today?
I don't know. I never have a good answer to this question because I don't feel like my life has sort of been punctuated by like one, sort of seminal hardship. And so I always feel like my answer is like either trivializing my own experiences or trivializing other people's. So I don't know. I mean, look, this profession that we're in is like a perpetually one of ups and downs, right? Like you think you're killing it and then this horrible mistake happens and or you've got this massive opportunity and then the printer runs out of books, or, you were so excited about this thing and then it fell through, or you were down in the dumps and then this amazing thing just caught you totally by surprise. So I've tried to kind of I think to me what Stoicism about is about that even keel. And so, it's not taking the hardships too hard and taking the good things, not getting too pumped about the good things either. It's that even keel.
Yeah. Do you have a word that sticks out to you this year that you're focusing on, or a word on your journey through life?
Yeah. And I think it was your word in a previous year. Stillness. Can you stop and take everything in? Can you push everything out of your mind that's not important? Can you focus on the immediate task in front of you? And can you stop moving for a second too? And so that's what I'm thinking about this year. It's hard in the middle of a book launch, but.
And last question, what are you excited about now? Like, what are you excited about as you move forward?
That's a good one. I'm excited about this stillness thing because it's very different for me, right? It's like the opposite of I like that word because it's if you were to describe me in one word, that's not the word you would choose, right? And so you'd probably choose a word like intense or energy or something like that. And so I'm looking to sort of push myself in different directions, and so I'm excited about the terrifyingness of that.
I mean, as you run, do you find stillness while you're
Totally.
moving? Because we think stillness is about being still, but it's actually stillness of the mind, right?
Yeah. It's like silence, right? You think you turn off all outside noises, that it's quiet, but in fact you hear things that you weren't hearing before. And and I think with with running, swimming especially. I'm going to go swimming in a little bit. Swimming, to me, I'm on the move, but I feel totally sort of suspended in stillness when I do it.
Awesome. Ryan Holiday.
Thank you.
You are a gem. Thanks so much for all your
it.
insights. Keep up the great work.
Thanks.